clock on the wall of the emergency department at St. Mercy Hospital in Chicago clicked over to 10 p.m. It was a rainy Tuesday in November, the kind of night where the cold seeps into your bones and the ambulance bay doors rattle in their frames from the wind. Inside the triage station, the fluorescent lights hummed with that headache-inducing flicker that only night shift workers truly understand. The rain hammered against the windows like 1,000 tiny fists, each drop a reminder that winter was coming early this year. The waiting room was half full. A construction worker with a gashed hand, a teenager with a possible broken ankle, an elderly woman clutching her chest, her daughter beside her whispering reassurances. Just another Tuesday night in the trauma capital of the Midwest. Behind the nurses' station, Elena Carter moved like a ghost through the organized chaos. At 28 years old, she looked younger. She stood barely 5'4" in her worn sneakers, her frame slight enough that her navy blue scrubs seemed to swallow her whole. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail that always seemed on the verge of falling apart, strands escaping to frame a face that was unremarkable in every way except for the eyes. If anyone had looked closely at those eyes, really looked, they might have seen something that didn't quite match the rest of her. A hardness, a distance, the kind of gaze that had seen things no 28-year-old should have seen. But no one looked closely at Elena Carter. "Carter, for God's sake, move faster!" The sharp voice cut through the low murmur of the ER like a knife. Margaret Walsh, head nurse, stood with her hands planted firmly on her hips, glaring at the newest addition to the nursing staff. Margaret was 50 years old, cynical, and moved with the brutal efficiency of someone who had seen it all and liked none of it. She had worked at St. Mercy for 23 years. She had held pressure on arterial bleeds while doctors were still scrubbing in. She had pronounced children dead. She had watched good nurses crack under the pressure and bad nurses somehow survive. And she had decided, within Elena Carter's first week, that this girl was soft. Elena flinched at the sound of her name. She kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the IV tray she was organizing. Her hands moved with deliberate care, checking each saline bag, each catheter, each roll of medical tape. "I'm sorry, Margaret," Elena mumbled, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to make sure the potassium ratios were correct. Sometimes pharmacy makes mistakes and—" "I don't pay you to check ratios that pharmacy already checked," Margaret snapped, snatching a patient chart from the counter with enough force to make the metal clipboard ring. "I pay you to get needles in arms and clear beds. You've been here 3 weeks, Carter, and you're still moving like you're afraid the floor is going to bite you." Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper that somehow felt more cutting than her earlier shout. "Dr. Brennan is already asking why I hired you. Do you understand what that means? It means I'm putting my reputation on the line for someone who jumps at loud noises and takes 15 minutes to set up a simple IV line." Elena nodded, her face flushing crimson. She didn't argue. She never argued. Since arriving at St. Mercy 3 weeks ago, Elena Carter had been invisible. She ate lunch alone in her car, sitting in the parking garage with the windows rolled up, staring at nothing. She never joined the other nurses for drinks after shifts. When trauma cases rolled in, car wrecks, shootings, the gritty stuff that made this hospital a level 1 trauma center, Elena always seemed to fade into the background. She handled paperwork. She stocked supplies. She left the blood and guts to the real nurses. The general consensus among the staff was clear. Elena Carter was soft. She was a hospitality hire, someone who belonged in a quiet dermatology clinic or maybe a school nurse's office, not the inner-city meat grinder of St. Mercy. Near the coffee machine, Dr. Richard Brennan leaned against the counter, steam rising from his cup as he spoke to a young resident. Brennan was 42 years old, arrogant, brilliant, and possessed of a God complex that barely fit through the double doors of the ER. He had graduated top of his class from Johns Hopkins. He had published papers on trauma surgery that were now standard teaching materials. He knew he was good, and he made sure everyone else knew it too. He gestured with his coffee cup toward Elena, who was now struggling to unlock a supply cabinet, her hands fumbling with the key. "Look at her," Brennan said, his voice carrying just far enough to be overheard. "She's shaking, literally shaking. If a real bleeder comes in tonight, she's going to faint. Mark my words." The resident, a nervous 26-year-old named Chen, chuckled uncomfortably. "Maybe she's just cold, Dr. Brennan. It's freezing in here." "She's scared," Brennan said dismissively. "Some people have the stomach for this work, and some people don't. She's prey. In the wild, she'd be eaten in 5 minutes." Elena heard them. She had ears like a bat, though she pretended not to. She finally got the cabinet open, grabbed a box of sterile gauze, and hurried toward bed 4, where a construction worker named Carlos Rodriguez was waiting. He had sliced his hand open on a piece of sheet metal, and the wound needed cleaning and dressing. As Elena approached, Carlos looked up from his phone. He was a big man, maybe 6'2", 240 pounds, with calloused hands and a face weathered by years of outdoor work. He had 3 kids at home and a wife who worked nights at a grocery store. He couldn't afford to miss work, which was why he'd waited 4 hours to come to the ER, hoping the bleeding would stop on its own. It hadn't. "Sorry for the wait, Mr. Rodriguez," Elena said softly, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. "Let me take a look." She unwrapped the blood-soaked towel he'd been holding against the wound. The cut was deep, running across the meat of his palm from the base of his thumb to his pinky finger. It would need stitches, maybe 8 or 10 of them. As Elena began to clean the wound, her hands trembled slightly. Carlos winced as the antiseptic solution hit the exposed flesh. "Easy there," he grunted. "That stings like a—" "Deep breath, Carlos," Elena said. Her voice changed. It dropped an octave, becoming soothing, almost hypnotic. It was the voice of someone who had talked people through pain before. Real pain. The kind of pain that came with shrapnel wounds and severed arteries and sucking chest wounds. "Look at the wall. Count the tiles. You're okay. I've got you." Her movements, which had been clumsy and hesitant when Margaret was watching, suddenly became fluid and precise. She cleaned the wound with a speed and efficiency that was almost mechanical. Her hands no longer trembled. They moved with purpose. She irrigated the laceration, checked for foreign bodies, applied pressure to the bleeding edges. Then she began to suture. The needle moved in perfect arcs, in and out, in and out. Each stitch placed exactly 4 millimeters from the last. The tension was perfect, tight enough to close the wound, loose enough to allow for swelling. She tied off each suture with a surgeon's knot, her fingers moving so fast they blurred. 5 minutes later, she was wrapping the hand in a compression bandage. Israeli style, the kind they taught in combat medicine courses, the kind that could stop arterial bleeding in the field when you had no backup and no time. Carlos looked down at his hand, flexing his fingers experimentally. The bandage was perfect, tight, secure, but not so tight that it cut off circulation. "Damn, nurse," he said, genuine surprise in his voice. "That was fast. You done this before?" Elena blinked, and just like that, the transformation reversed. Her shoulders hunched, her eyes dropped to the floor. She became small again. "Oh, a little. In nursing school. Just practice." She scurried away before Carlos could ask anything else, leaving him staring after her with a puzzled expression. Back at the nurse's station, the radio crackled to life. The static hiss cut through the ambient noise of the ER like a warning shot. "St. Mercy Base, this is Unit 42. We are inbound. ETA 3 minutes. Margaret reached for the microphone, her expression already shifting to one of weary resignation. Tuesday nights always brought in the drunks, the addicts, the people who turned emergency rooms into their personal crisis centers. "Copy, 42. What have you got?" There was a pause. Then the paramedic's voice came back, and there was something in his tone that made Elena's hands freeze over the keyboard where she'd been logging Carlos's discharge instructions. Walk-in picked up off 5th and Main. Male, approximately late 30s. Highly agitated. Possible substance abuse or psychiatric episode. Vitals are stable, but he's non-compliant. He's big, St. Mercy. Really big. We tried restraints, but he refused them. Physically. Be advised, you might want security standing by. Margaret rolled her eyes. She'd heard this song before. Every week brought another high-as-a-kite giant who thought he could fight the world. Copy 42. Drop him in Bay 2. We'll have security ready. She hung up the microphone and turned to Elena, who was still standing frozen by the computer. Carter, Bay 2. Try not to let him vomit on you. If he gets rowdy, you call security immediately. Do not try to be a hero. Do you understand me? Yes, ma'am, Elena said softly. If only Margaret knew. Heroism was the last thing on Elena's mind. She just wanted to survive the shift. She wanted to collect her paycheck, go back to her studio apartment, and stare at the ceiling until sleep finally came. She wanted to be invisible. But the universe, as it often does, had other plans. The sliding doors of the ambulance bay hissed open at exactly 10:14 p.m. A gust of rain and wind swept into the ER, bringing with it the smell of wet asphalt and exhaust fumes. The paramedics from Unit 42 didn't just wheel a stretcher in. They looked like they were fleeing a crime scene. "Clear the way," the lead paramedic shouted, his face pale despite years of working Chicago streets. His name tag read, Torres. He was 40 years old and had seen everything from gang shootings to industrial accidents. But his hands were shaking as he pushed through the doors. "He refused the stretcher. He's walking." "We couldn't. You let a psych patient walk in?" Margaret stood up from behind the desk, her voice sharp with disbelief. "What the hell were you thinking?" Before Torres could answer, a shadow fell over the triage desk. The man who stepped through the ambulance bay doors had to duck his head to clear the frame. He was immense, at least 6'10", maybe taller, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the entire doorway. He wore a torn, mud-stained army jacket that was 2 sizes too small for his chest. The sleeves had been ripped at the seams, exposing arms thick with muscle and crisscrossed with scars. His cargo pants were torn at the knees, and his boots, military-issue combat boots, left muddy prints on the white linoleum floor. But it was his face that stopped the room. A thick, matted beard covered his jaw, streaked with gray despite his relatively young age. A jagged scar ran from his left eyebrow down across his cheek to his lip, pulling the corner of his mouth into a permanent half-sneer. His eyes were wide and darting, moving constantly, scanning every corner of the room with the frantic intensity of a trapped animal. Sweat poured down his face despite the cold, and his chest heaved like a bellows. This was Sergeant Marcus Webb, 38 years old, former Army Ranger, 2 tours in Iraq, 3 in Afghanistan, recipient of the Bronze Star with Valor, diagnosed with severe PTSD 6 months ago, admitted to a VA psychiatric ward in Maryland, and missing for the last 3 weeks. But no one in the ER knew any of that yet. All they knew was that a giant had just walked into their hospital, and he was seeing things that weren't there. "Where is she?" The voice that came out of Marcus Webb was a baritone thunderclap. It rattled the glass partition of the reception desk. It made the overhead lights seem to flicker. In the waiting room, conversations stopped mid-sentence. A baby that had been crying went silent, as if sensing danger. The construction worker, Carlos, still holding his bandaged hand, took one look at the giant and slowly stood up, backing toward the exit. Dr. Brennan stepped out of Trauma Room 1, clipboard in hand, his face already shifting into that expression of authority he wore like armor. "Excuse me," Brennan said, his voice cold and professional. "You cannot shout in here. This is a hospital. Lower your voice or I will have you removed." It was exactly the wrong thing to say. Marcus's head snapped toward the doctor, but Marcus wasn't seeing Dr. Richard Brennan, arrogant trauma surgeon. In his mind, in the reality that existed only behind his eyes, he was standing in the middle of a compound in Kandahar province. The fluorescent lights were the blinding sun of the Afghan desert. The beeping of the heart monitors was radio chatter. The smell of antiseptic was cordite and blood. And Dr. Brennan wasn't a doctor. He was an interrogator. I said, "Where is she?" Marcus lunged. The movement was terrifyingly fast for a man of his size. He covered the 20 feet to the nurse's station in 3 massive strides, his boots hammering the floor like artillery strikes. "Security!" Margaret shrieked, diving behind the counter. 2 hospital security guards had been stationed by the vending machines, doing what they did most nights, eating chips and watching YouTube videos on their phones. Paul Martinez was 55 years old, retired Chicago PD, heavyset and slow. His partner, Danny Kim, was a 20-year-old college student working part-time to pay for tuition. They rushed forward, batons drawn. "Sir, get on the ground!" Paul shouted, reaching for Marcus's arm. It was like a toddler trying to stop a freight train. Marcus didn't even look at Paul. He simply backhanded the guard without breaking stride. The blow caught Paul in the chest, lifting his 200-pound frame completely off the ground and sending him crashing into a cart of sterile equipment. Metal trays clattered across the floor in a deafening cascade. Needles scattered. Bags of saline burst open. Danny froze. He was standing 3 feet from this mountain of a man, holding a baton that suddenly seemed about as useful as a toothpick. His hand was shaking so hard the baton rattled. "Sir, please, sir." Marcus grabbed Danny by the vest with one hand, lifted him completely off the ground, and tossed him aside like he weighed nothing. Danny slid across the polished floor and hit the wall with a sickening thud, his head bouncing off the drywall. He didn't get up. Chaos erupted. Nurses screamed and scattered like birds. Patients in the waiting room scrambled over chairs to get to the exit, forming a bottleneck at the doors. Somewhere, an alarm was going off. Dr. Brennan, realizing his authority meant absolutely nothing to a giant in a fugue state, turned pale and backed away, colliding with a crash cart that went rolling across the floor. "He's got a weapon!" someone screamed. Marcus didn't have a gun, but he had ripped a metal IV pole out of its stand, pulling it free with a shriek of bending metal and broken plastic. He held the heavy steel rod like a baseball bat, swinging it in a wide arc that made everyone within 10 feet dive for cover. "Get down! Everyone get down!" Marcus bellowed, his eyes seeing invisible enemies that only he could perceive. "Incoming! Mortars! Take cover!" He smashed the IV pole into the reception desk. The safety glass exploded, showering the receptionists huddled underneath with crystalline fragments. One of them was screaming, another was sobbing. The third had gone completely silent, her eyes wide and unblinking. Elena Carter was standing by bed too, clutching a clipboard to her chest like a shield. She watched the carnage unfold with wide eyes. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard it hurt. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to run, to hide, to get as far away from this man as possible. But she didn't move. She observed. She saw the way Marcus moved. He wasn't stumbling like a drunk. He wasn't flailing randomly. He was checking corners. He was clearing his sectors. He was protecting his flanks. Every movement, despite the apparent chaos, had purpose. It had training behind it. Her eyes tracked down to his wrist as he swung the IV pole again. There, barely visible beneath the mud and grime, was a faded tattoo, a Ranger tab. 75th Ranger Regiment. "He's not crazy," Elena whispered to herself, her voice so quiet it was lost in the screaming. "He's tactical." Elena's eyes moved from the tattoo to Marcus's face. She saw the scar. She saw the way his pupils were dilated. She saw the way his jaw was clenched, grinding his teeth. She'd seen these signs before. Not in a hospital, not in Chicago, in a field hospital in Kandahar province, 5 years ago, when she'd been wearing a different uniform and going by a different name. "He's having a flashback," she said, still whispering. "Carter, run, you idiot!" Margaret screamed from behind the desk, her voice cracking with fear. "Get to the break room and lock the door." Elena didn't move. She couldn't, because Marcus was advancing on Dr. Brennan now, backing the doctor into a corner. Brennan was pressed against the wall, his hands up, his face white as paper. Marcus raised the metal IV pole, his muscles tensing for a killing blow. "Tell me where the extraction point is," Marcus screamed at the terrified doctor. Saliva flew from his mouth. His eyes were wild, seeing something other than the man in front of him. "Tell me now, or I'll—" "I don't know," Brennan sobbed. "I don't know what you're talking about, please." Marcus roared and pulled the pole back, ready to swing. Elena dropped her clipboard. It hit the floor with a sharp crack that cut through the noise. And then Elena Carter, the timid mouse who jumped at loud sounds, did something that would change everything. She didn't run away. She walked forward. The distance between Elena and Marcus was 30 feet. To the nurses and doctors peeking out from behind curtains and overturned chairs, it looked like a suicide attempt. Elena looked like a child next to him. A strong breeze could knock her over. What could she possibly hope to do against a man who had just thrown two grown men like rag dolls? But Elena walked with a deliberate, rhythmic pace. Not running. Running triggers a predator response. Running makes you prey. She walked. She didn't look at the weapon. She looked at his eyes. She stopped 10 feet away from him, close enough to be heard clearly, far enough to have a split second to react if he turned violent. Sergeant Webb. Her voice wasn't the whispered, timid voice of Elena Carter, the rookie nurse. It was sharp, clear, projected from the diaphragm. It was a command voice, the kind of voice that cuts through gunfire and explosions, the kind of voice that had been trained into her in a place most people didn't know existed. Marcus froze. The metal pole hovered inches from Dr. Brennan's head, vibrating with the tension in Marcus's arms. The use of his rank, sergeant, cut through the fog in his brain like a knife. It was a word that meant something, a word that connected to who he really was, buried beneath the PTSD and the flashbacks and the medication that hadn't worked. He spun around, searching for the source of the command. He saw a small woman in oversized blue scrubs, her dark hair falling around her face. In his hallucination, she was blurry, indistinct, but real enough to be a threat. "Identify," Marcus barked, lowering his center of gravity ready to strike. Elena took a breath. This was the moment. If she got this wrong, if she said the wrong thing, people would die. She'd seen Rangers flip from calm to violent in a microsecond when their PTSD was triggered. She'd seen men wake up from nightmares and attack their own squad mates, thinking they were enemy combatants. But she'd also learned how to pull them back. "Corpsman up!" The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Corpsman. It was the call for a medic on the battlefield. It was a sacred word. It meant someone was hurt. It meant help was coming. Marcus blinked, confusion warring with the rage in his eyes. "Stand down, Ranger," Elena said, her voice still hard as iron. She took a step closer. Her hands were open, held at chest level, non-threatening, but ready. "We are in the green zone. The perimeter is secure. You are flagging a friendly. Lower your weapon." Dr. Brennan, still cowering on the floor against the wall, looked up at Elena with complete bewilderment. What was she saying? What was a green zone? Why was she using these words? But the words were working. Marcus shook his head violently, like a dog shaking off water. He was fighting the visions, fighting the past that was overlaying itself on the present. "No," he growled. "No, they're coming. The insurgents. They breached the perimeter. They have her. I have to find her. I have to find Mary." Mary. The name came out like a prayer. Elena's heart clenched. She knew that name. Every Ranger and Delta operator who'd served in Afghanistan between 2018 and 2020 knew that name. Mary Sullivan, translator, 26 years old, killed in an IED attack outside Kandahar. The blast had taken out half a convoy. Sergeant Marcus Webb had been holding her when she died. Mary is safe, Elena lied without hesitation. Her tone remained unwavering. She stepped closer. 5 feet now. She was well within his striking range. One swing of that pole would shatter every bone in her upper body. I just radioed command. Mary is at the LZ, the landing zone. She's waiting for you, Sergeant. Marcus's breathing hitched. His eyes, which had been darting wildly, suddenly focused on Elena's face. She's waiting? Yes, but you can't go to her with a weapon. You know the protocol. No weapons in the green zone. The MPS will stop you, and then you can't get to Mary. Elena reached out with a trembling hand, not trembling from fear this time, trembling from adrenaline, from the sheer audacity of what she was doing. She touched the cold steel of the IV pole. Give it to me, Sergeant. Let me secure your weapon. Then you can go to Mary. For a heartbeat, the entire ER held its breath. 50 people who had been watching in horror now watched in stunned silence. Marcus's grip on the pole loosened slightly. He looked at Elena, his eyes searching hers for any sign of deception. Is everyone safe? He whispered. His voice cracked. Did I get everyone out? All clear, Elena said softly. You did good, Ranger. Everyone's safe because of you. Now give me the weapon. Marcus let out a shuddering sigh. His massive shoulders sagged. The rage, the fear, the confusion, it all seemed to drain out of him at once, leaving behind only exhaustion. He released the pole. Elena took it gently and set it on the floor, pushing it away with her foot. She kept her eyes on Marcus the entire time. You're safe, she said quietly. You're in Chicago. You're in a hospital. No one is going to hurt you. I need you to sit down for me. Can you do that? Marcus nodded slowly. His legs were shaking. He looked around the destroyed ER as if seeing it for the first time. The broken glass, the overturned equipment, the terrified faces staring at him. I didn't mean to, he started. I know, Elena said. It's okay. We're going to help you. Just sit down. Marcus sank to his knees first, then sat back on the floor, his back against the wall. He put his head in his hands. His shoulders began to shake. Not with rage this time, with sobs. Elena crouched beside him, still keeping a safe distance, and looked back at the frozen crowd. Someone get me a sedative, 10 milligrams of haloperidol and 2 of Ativan, and get a cardiac monitor. His heart rate is through the roof. No one moved. They were all staring at her like she just performed a miracle. Now, Elena snapped, and suddenly people were moving again. But then, just as the tension seemed to break, the elevator at the far end of the hallway dinged. The doors slid open. 2 Chicago police officers burst out, guns drawn, shouting at the top of their lungs. Police! Drop it! Get on the ground now! The sudden noise shattered the fragile reality Elena had built. The green zone, the safe space. It all collapsed in an instant. Marcus's eyes snapped open, and the fear came roaring back. The officers weren't friendlies. They were the enemy. They were the ambush. Ambush! Marcus screamed. He didn't go for the IV pole. He went for Elena. In his mind, she had lied to him. She was part of the trap. She was a spy who had tricked him. His hands shot out with terrifying speed. It wrapped around Elena's throat, fingers the size of bratwursts closing around her windpipe. He lifted her completely off the ground as if she weighed nothing, her feet kicking uselessly in the air. Traitor! He roared. Shoot him! Shoot him! Dr. Brennan screamed from the floor. The police officers hesitated. Their guns were aimed, but they had a clear problem. If they fired, they might hit the nurse. Elena dangled in the air. Her vision began to spot with black dots as the pressure on her windpipe increased. She could feel her larynx being crushed. She had maybe 10 seconds before she lost consciousness, maybe 20 before she died. But Elena Carter didn't panic. Her face was turning purple. Her lungs were screaming for air, but her eyes remained laser-focused. She didn't claw at his hands like a victim would. She didn't waste her energy on futile struggling. She reached for his thumb. She knew something that the police, the doctors, and even Marcus Webb in his current state didn't know. She knew how to dismantle a human body. Elena swung her legs up, wrapping them around Marcus's massive bicep to gain leverage. She isolated his thumb, the weakest point of any grip, and bent it backward against the joint with sudden, brutal force. At the same time, she drove her elbow into the bundle of nerves in his forearm, just above the wrist. It was a Krav Maga technique. It was simple, it was effective, and it was executed with the precision of someone who had done it 100 times before. Marcus roared in pain. His grip involuntarily released. Elena dropped to the floor, gasping for air. Her throat felt like it was on fire, but she didn't retreat. She didn't run, because Marcus, enraged and in pain, swung a wild haymaker punch at her head, a blow that would have decapitated her, a blow thrown with 300 pounds of muscle behind it. Elena ducked. She pivoted on her left heel, using his momentum against him. As his fist whistled over her head, she moved behind him. She kicked the back of his knee, buckling his leg. And as he fell forward, she locked her arm around his neck. She wasn't choking him, not in the traditional sense. She was applying a vascular sleeper hold, also called a blood choke. Her forearm pressed against one side of his neck, her bicep against the other, compressing both carotid arteries, cutting off the blood flow to his brain. "Sleep, Sergeant," she rasped into his ear, her voice strained with the effort of holding back 300 pounds of thrashing muscle. "Just sleep. You're safe. Just sleep." Marcus bucked like a wild bronco. He slammed backward into the wall, trying to crush her. Elena grunted as her back hit the concrete, but she held on. She wrapped her legs around his waist, locking her ankles together. The hooks were in. She was a backpack of doom attached to a giant. The police officers stood there, guns still drawn but lowered now, their mouths agape. They had no idea what they were witnessing. 10 seconds. Marcus's thrashing slowed. 20 seconds. His arms fell to his sides. 30 seconds. His massive legs gave out. Elena rode him down to the floor like a rodeo rider, maintaining the hold until she felt his body go completely limp. She checked his pulse at his neck, strong and steady, then released him and rolled away, gasping for breath. She massaged her bruised throat with one hand, coughing. The room was dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the vending machine down the hall and Elena's ragged breathing. She sat up slowly, adjusted her messy ponytail, and pulled her oversized scrubs back into place. Her hands were shaking again. She looked down at them, surprised by the tremor. Then she looked up. 50 pairs of eyes stared back at her. Head nurse Margaret Walsh slowly stood up from behind the desk where she'd been hiding. Her face was white. Her hands were gripping the edge of the counter so hard, her knuckles were bloodless. "Carter," she whispered. "What? Who are you?" Elena looked down at her shaking hands again. She looked at Marcus's unconscious form, then at the police officers, then at Dr. Brennan, who was still pressed against the wall, staring at her like she was an alien. She cleared her throat. When she spoke, her voice was back to being small, timid. "He needs 10 milligrams of haloperidol and 2 of Ativan," Elena said hoarsely, "and someone should get a cardiac monitor on him. He has an arrhythmia. I could feel it when I—" She stopped. "Just get the monitor." She stood up, ignoring the stares. Her legs felt like water. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her cold and shaky. "I need to use the bathroom," she mumbled. And Elena Carter walked past the stunned police officers, past the gaping doctor, and pushed through the double doors leading to the staff area. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway. Behind her, the ER slowly came back to life. But nothing would ever be the same. The questions would come, the investigations, the lies she'd have to tell. But for now, Elena Carter had survived another night. She just didn't know it would be her last night of invisibility. The bathroom mirror was cracked in the corner, a spider web of fractured glass that distorted Elena's reflection into something broken and fragmented. She gripped the porcelain sink with white-knuckled hands, staring at the woman staring back at her. The bruises were already forming on her neck. Ugly violet fingerprints left by Marcus Webb's massive hand, each one a perfect impression of where his fingers had tried to crush her windpipe. She splashed freezing water on her face, trying to wash away the adrenaline that was making her teeth chatter. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't restraint. It was the aftermath. The body's way of saying, you almost died, and you need to process that. Stupid, she thought, staring at her reflection. Stupid, stupid, stupid. You exposed yourself. For 3 years, Elena Carter had been invisible. She had been nobody, a mediocre nurse from Ohio with a forgettable face and a quiet voice. She wasn't Captain Elena Morrison anymore. She wasn't the woman who had 47 confirmed kills in Afghanistan. She wasn't the Delta Force combat medic who had pulled 3 men out of a burning Humvee while under fire. She wasn't the operator with a 94% mission success rate. She was just Elena. Quiet, timid, forgettable Elena. Until tonight. She reached into her scrub pocket and pulled out a small, battered silver coin. It was worn smooth from years of being rubbed by nervous fingers. On one side was the insignia of Delta Force. On the other, engraved in tiny letters, Phoenix Ember, 2019. 8 names were listed around the edge of the coin. 8 operators who had gone into the mountains of Afghanistan on a mission that didn't officially exist. Only 3 had come out alive. Elena rubbed the coin with her thumb, a nervous habit she'd developed in the 3 years since she disappeared. The metal was warm from being in her pocket. It felt real, solid. Unlike everything else in her life, which felt like smoke and mirrors. Breathe, she told herself. Deny, deflect, get out. The door creaked open behind her. It was Margaret. The head nurse didn't shout this time. She didn't look angry. She looked terrified. She stood in the doorway holding an ice pack, her hands trembling almost as badly as Elena's. Carter. Margaret's voice was uncharacteristically gentle. The police want to talk to you. They're waiting in the break room. Elena dried her face with a rough paper towel, instantly forcing herself back into the role. She hunched her shoulders. She made herself small. Am I in trouble? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to hurt him. I panicked. Margaret stared at her. The silence stretched for several long seconds. Panicked, Margaret finally said. The word came out flat, disbelieving. Elena, you didn't panic. You took down a man who threw Paul and Danny like they were children. You saved Dr. Brennan's life. Probably saved a dozen other lives too. She stepped forward and held out the ice pack. Here, for your neck. Thanks, Elena whispered, pressing the cold pack against her bruised throat. The cold was sharp, painful, but it helped ground her. Who are you, really? Margaret asked quietly, her eyes searching Elena's face like she was seeing her for the first time. I'm just a nurse, Elena lied, looking at the floor. Nurses don't move like that, Margaret said. My ex-husband was a Marine. He did 2 tours in Fallujah. He moves like you moved. He scans rooms like you scan rooms. He has that same look in his eyes sometimes, like he's seeing something the rest of us can't see. I took a self-defense class, Elena mumbled, at the YWCA. The instructor was very thorough. Margaret didn't buy it. Elena could see that clearly, but the older woman didn't press. Instead, she just nodded slowly. Come on, Captain Kane is waiting. The break room smelled of stale coffee and burnt popcorn. Someone had left the microwave running too long during the day shift, and the acrid smell still lingered in the air despite the open window. The table was small and round, surrounded by mismatched chairs with worn cushions. The walls were covered with mandatory safety posters and a corkboard full of shift schedules and takeout menus. Captain Vincent Kane sat at the table, his notebook open in front of him. He was 60 years old with gray hair cut military short and eyes that had seen every lie Chicago had to offer. He'd been a cop for 38 years. He'd worked homicide for 20 of those. He knew what guilt looked like. He knew what fear looked like. And he knew what trained killers looked like. Standing beside him, pacing nervously and checking his phone every 30 seconds, was Dr. Richard Brennan. His pristine white coat was rumpled now, and there was a coffee stain on his shirt that he kept touching absently, like he couldn't quite believe it was real. Elena sat down, keeping her posture small and non-threatening. She set the ice pack on the table and folded her hands in her lap. "Miss Carter," Kane started, his voice gravelly from decades of smoking and shouting. "That was quite a show out there." "I was scared," Elena squeaked, making her voice higher and thinner than it naturally was. "Scared people run," Kane said flatly. "Scared people scream. Scared people hide under tables and pray. You didn't do any of those things. You engaged a hostile target. You de-escalated verbally using military jargon. And then you executed a textbook rear-naked choke with a body triangle." He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving her face. "That's not scared. That's training. So I'll ask you again, and I want the truth this time. Where did you serve?" "I didn't," Elena said, widening her eyes to look innocent and confused. "I've never been in the military, I swear." "Then how did you know the term corpsman up?" Kane shot back. "How did you know to call it a green zone? How did you know that man was a ranger just by looking at a faint tattoo on a moving target while he was destroying my ER?" Elena swallowed hard. This was the danger zone, the place where lies got tangled up and caught on themselves. I watch a lot of movies," she said weakly. "Black Hawk Down, Zero Dark 30, Lone Survivor. I guessed." Dr. Brennan stopped pacing. He scoffed loudly, a harsh sound full of disbelief and anger. "She's lying, Captain. Look at her pulse." Brennan pointed at Elena's neck, where her carotid artery was visible beneath the bruises. 72 beats per minute. She's not even nervous. She's not scared of being caught. She's acting. Brennan walked over to the table and slammed his hand down on the surface, making Elena flinch. It wasn't an act that time. The sudden noise triggered something in her, a memory of mortars landing, and she had to force herself not to dive for cover. "I checked your file, Carter," Brennan said, his voice dripping with contempt. "St. Mary's Prep School in Ohio. I called the number for the reference listed on your CV 20 minutes ago." Elena's heart skipped a beat. She kept her face impassive, but inside alarms were going off. "And?" Kane asked. "It went to a voicemail," Brennan said triumphantly. "But not a school voicemail. A burner phone. A generic Google voice greeting. And your nursing license number? It clears the state board, but the issue date is exactly 3 years ago. Not 3 years and 2 months. Not 2 years and 11 months. Exactly 3 years ago to the day." He leaned down, putting his face close to Elena's. "What were you doing before 2021, Miss Carter? Or should I say, Miss whoever you really are?" "I was caring for my mother," Elena improvised quickly. "She had dementia, early onset. I had to take time off. I was off the grid. No social media, no phone, nothing. I just took care of her until she passed." "Bull," Brennan spat. "You're a fraud. You're a liability to this hospital. I'm calling the state board first thing in the morning, and then I'm calling—" "Doctor, back off," Kane warned, his voice hard. "You're not a cop. You don't get to interrogate my witnesses." Brennan straightened up, his face red, but he stepped back. Kane turned his attention back to Elena. His expression softened slightly, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost gentle. "Look, Miss Carter, or whatever your real name is, I don't care if you lied on your resume. I don't care if you've got secrets. That man out there? He gestured toward the ER. His name is Marcus Webb. We ran his prints while the paramedics were stabilizing him. Do you know who he is? Elena shook her head, even though her stomach was churning. She knew exactly who Marcus Webb was. She'd served with him. Not directly, but they'd been in the same theater. She'd seen his face in briefings. He's a Silver Star recipient, Kane said softly. Served 4 tours, Rangers, then Delta. He went AWOL 6 months ago from a VA psych ward in Maryland. The military has a BOLO out on him. Be on the lookout. They consider him armed and extremely dangerous. Kane closed his notebook and leaned back in his chair. And you put him to sleep like a baby. A highly trained special operations soldier with severe PTSD. You talked him down, and when that didn't work, you took him down. Ordinary people don't do that. Ordinary people don't know how to do that. He paused, studying her face. If you're in trouble, if you're running from something, you can tell me. I've been doing this long enough to know when someone needs help. Elena looked into Captain Kane's eyes. She saw genuine concern there, genuine kindness. For a moment, just a brief, flickering moment, she wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to say, yes, I'm running. I'm running from the memories of the village I couldn't save. I'm running from the medals they tried to pin on my chest while blood was still under my fingernails. I'm running from Operation Phoenix Ember and the 5 friends who died because someone in Washington decided their lives were worth less than a secret. But she couldn't, because if she told the truth, she'd be dead within 24 hours. The people who had tried to kill her 3 years ago were still out there, still looking, still waiting for her to surface. I'm just a nurse, she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. Not an act this time. Real emotion was leaking through. Can I please go back to my patients now? Kane sighed. He looked disappointed but not surprised. Go, he said quietly, but don't leave town. I'll need to talk to you again. Elena stood up quickly and hurried toward the door. Her hand was on the handle when Dr. Brennan's voice stopped her. This isn't over, Carter. I'm going to find out who you really are. Elena didn't respond. She just pulled the door open and stepped out into the hallway, closing it behind her. As soon as the door shut, Brennan pulled out his phone. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, pulling up a contact he hadn't used since his residency at Walter Reed Medical Center 15 years ago. He hit dial. It rang 4 times before a tired voice answered. Colonel Sharp speaking. This better be important. It's 0300. Colonel, it's Richard Brennan. Yes, from Walter Reed. Listen, I'm sorry to wake you, but I have a situation here. I need you to run a background check on someone. A ghost. Maybe military, maybe intelligence, I don't know. There was rustling on the other end of the line, the sound of someone sitting up in bed. What's the name? Elena Carter, but I think that's an alias. She just took down a Tier 1 operator in my ER with her bare hands. No hesitation, no fear, just pure training. I'm sending you her photo right now. Brennan quickly snapped a picture of Elena through the break room door's small window. She was walking away down the hallway, her shoulders hunched, looking small and defeated. He hit send. Got it, Colonel Sharp said after a moment. I'll run it through our databases. If she's one of ours, I'll find her. Give me 30 minutes. Thank you, Colonel. Brennan hung up and smiled grimly. Gotcha, he whispered. 2 hours crawled by like wounded animals. The adrenaline in the ER had faded, replaced by the dull fatigue of the graveyard shift. The broken glass had been swept up. The overturned equipment had been righted. Paul Martinez had been checked out and cleared to go home with bruised ribs. Danny Kim had a concussion and was being kept for observation. Marcus Webb was in bed 4, handcuffed to the railing, heavily sedated. 2 Chicago police officers stood guard beside him, their hands never far from their weapons. Every 15 minutes, a nurse checked his vitals. His heart rate was steady now, his breathing was regular, but his face, even in sleep, looked haunted. Elena tried to busy herself with stocking IV bags in the supply closet, staying as far away from the main floor as possible. Her mind was racing. She needed to leave. Tonight, right now. She'd pack her duffel bag, get in her beat-up Honda Civic, and drive until the gas ran out. Maybe Montana this time, maybe New Mexico, somewhere with wide-open spaces and very few people. She was reaching for her car keys in her locker when the PA system crackled to life with a sound that made her blood run cold. Code Black, main entrance. Code Black, main entrance. Code Black meant an active threat, a bomb threat, a mass casualty event involving VIPs, a terrorist attack. It meant the hospital was being locked down. Elena froze, her hand still on her locker door. They found me, she thought. Her heart began to hammer in her chest. They finally found me. She rushed out of the break area and back toward the ER, just in time to see the automatic doors at the main entrance forced open. Not slid open, pushed, with enough force that one of them came off its track and hung at an angle. 6 men in full tactical gear poured through the opening like black water. They wore no insignia, no name tags, just matte black uniforms, helmets with dark visors, and assault rifles held at the ready across their chests. They moved with a fluidity that made the hospital security guards look like children playing dress-up. They didn't shout. They didn't announce themselves. They simply fanned out, securing the perimeter in complete silence. Each man knew exactly where to go, exactly what sector to cover. It was a textbook military insertion. Behind them walked a man who radiated authority like heat from a furnace. He wore a crisp army dress uniform, the kind reserved for formal occasions and funerals. The chest was heavy with ribbons and medals. Purple Heart, Bronze Star with Valor, Silver Star, Distinguished Service Cross. And there, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, 3 stars on each shoulder. Lieutenant General Marcus Holloway, 58 years old, a man who had commanded troops in Desert Storm, in Bosnia, in Afghanistan. A man whose face appeared in classified briefings and whose name was whispered in the halls of the Pentagon. The entire ER went deadly silent. Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. Dr. Brennan, who had been smugly waiting for Colonel Sharp to call back with information on Elena, dropped his clipboard. It clattered on the floor with a sound like breaking glass. He had called a colonel. A colonel. A 3-star general showing up meant this was way, way above his pay grade. Who is the attending physician in charge? General Holloway's voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. It was the voice of a man used to being obeyed instantly and without question. Dr. Brennan stepped forward, smoothing his white coat, trying to look important and in control, despite the coffee stain and the lingering fear in his eyes. I am Dr. Richard Brennan. General, I presume you're here for the prisoner, Sergeant Webb? Holloway looked at Brennan with the kind of disdain usually reserved for insects. He's not a prisoner. He's my man. Is he alive? He is, Brennan said quickly, sedated and restrained in bed 4. He assaulted my staff and destroyed hospital property. I expect full compensation from the Department of Defense for... Holloway ignored him completely. He walked past the doctor as if he didn't exist, heading toward bed 4 with long, purposeful strides. His boots clicked on the linoleum floor, each step like a drumbeat. He stopped beside the bed where Marcus Webb lay unconscious, his massive frame looking somehow smaller in sleep. Holloway's expression softened, just for a moment, just long enough for Elena, watching from the supply closet doorway, to see something almost paternal in the general's face. "We got you, son," Holloway whispered, reaching out to touch Marcus's shoulder. "You're going home." He turned to his men. "Prep him for transport. I want him at Walter Reed by sunrise. Full medical workup, psychiatric evaluation, and get Dr. Patterson on standby. She's the only shrink he trusts." "Wait a minute," Brennan protested, finding his voice again. "You can't just take him. The police have charges pending. There are procedures, paperwork. This is a civilian hospital and..." The United States Army has jurisdiction here, Doctor. Holloway cut him off, his voice like a blade. Sergeant Webb is a classified asset. His medical records are sealed. His service history is sealed. And as of right now, whatever happened here tonight didn't happen. Do you understand me? Brennan's face turned red. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. This is outrageous. This is a violation of what, Doctor? Holloway turned to face him fully now, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Of protocol? Of the law? Let me explain something to you. That man lying in that bed has done things for this country that you can't even imagine. He's killed for us. He's bled for us. And when his mind broke under the weight of what we asked him to do, we put him in a VA hospital and forgot about him. Holloway stepped closer to Brennan, and the doctor instinctively took a step back. So no, I'm not going to leave him here to be charged with assault. I'm not going to let him rot in a jail cell because some bureaucrat decided he's too dangerous to be free. I'm taking my man home. And if you have a problem with that, you can file a complaint with the Secretary of Defense. I'm sure he'll be very interested in your concerns. Brennan opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Captain Kane, silently pleading for backup. Kane held up his hands. General's right, Doc. This is above our pay grade. Marcus Webb goes with the Army. Brennan looked like he wanted to argue more, but then something seemed to occur to him. His expression changed from angry to calculating. What about the nurse? He said suddenly, pointing toward the back of the ER where Elena had been hiding. The one who took him down. She nearly killed your precious asset, General. If your man is classified, then she's a threat to operational security. She saw things. She knows things. She used military tactics on a Delta operator. Holloway paused. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the ER. Nurse? The girl who took him down, Brennan said, a note of triumph creeping into his voice. Elena Carter. She's a fraud. Fake credentials, fake background. I called Walter Reed. I sent her photo to Colonel Sharp. He should be calling back any minute with... Holloway's phone rang. The general pulled it from his pocket and looked at the screen. His face, which had been hard as granite, suddenly went pale. Not just pale, ashen, like he'd seen a ghost. He answered on the second ring. Sharp, what did you find? Elena couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she could see Holloway's face. She watched as shock gave way to disbelief, then to something that looked almost like grief. Are you certain? Holloway asked quietly. That's not possible. The file says she was KIA, Aleppo, 2021, confirmed dead. I signed the death certificate myself. I went to her memorial service. I handed the flag to her. He stopped. His hand tightened on the phone until his knuckles went white. Send me everything you have. Everything. Right now. He hung up and stood there for a moment, just breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Where is she? Where is the nurse who took down Sergeant Webb? She's hiding in the supply closet, probably, Brennan said smugly. I told you she's a fraud. So who is she, General? CIA? DIA? Some kind of assassin? Holloway grabbed Brennan by the lapels of his lab coat, pulling him close with sudden, terrifying violence. The tactical team immediately raised their weapons, but Holloway waved them off. You listen to me very carefully, Holloway hissed into Brennan's face. That woman is not a fraud. If that is who I think it is, if she's really alive, then she is the reason everyone in this room is still breathing. You have no idea what walked into your hospital tonight. None. Who? Brennan stammered. Who is she? She's the ghost, Holloway said, releasing him. And if she's really here, then everything I thought I knew about Operation Phoenix Ember is a lie. He turned to his men. Search this floor. I want a perimeter on all exits. No one leaves. Find her. Now. The tactical team began to move, checking rooms, opening doors, clearing sections with military precision. But before they could advance more than a few steps, Holloway's phone rang again. He looked at the screen, frowned, and answered. "This is Holloway." The voice on the other end was scrambled, distorted beyond recognition, but the words were clear. "General, stand down your men, now." "Who is this? How did you get this number?" "I'm the person who's kept Captain Morrison alive for 3 years while you were signing death certificates. I'm the person who scrubbed her from every database, and I'm the person who's about to make your life very difficult if you don't listen." Holloway's jaw clenched. "If you know about Morrison, then you know I have orders to bring her in. She's a security risk. She knows about Phoenix Ember. She knows you authorized the airstrike," the voice interrupted. "She knows it was deliberate, and she knows it connects to Firebase Echo. 50 years of lies, General. Are you ready for that to come out?" Holloway's face went white. Around him, the tactical team had frozen, waiting for orders. Dr. Brennan was watching with wide eyes, trying to piece together what was happening. "What do you want?" Holloway said quietly. "The men with you aren't Army, they're Black Talon, private contractors, and they don't have orders to extract Morrison and Webb. They have orders to terminate them. You've been played, Marcus. The people who authorize Phoenix Ember are cleaning house, and you're helping them do it." Holloway turned to look at the tactical team. Really look at them. No name tags, no unit insignia, weapons that weren't standard military issue, and the way they moved, professional, but not Army professional. These were hired guns. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" "Ask them who signs their checks. Ask them what their rules of engagement are. And then ask yourself why a 3-star general needs a kill team to pick up 2 wounded veterans." The line went dead. Holloway lowered the phone slowly. He looked at the lead contractor. "Who's your commanding officer?" The contractor didn't answer. "I asked you a question, soldier. Who signs your orders?" The contractor's hand moved slightly on his rifle, not raising it, not yet, but shifting into a position of readiness. "We have our orders, General. Step aside." "Stand down," Holloway said, his voice hardening. "That's an order. Lower your weapons. We're taking Morrison and Webb into protective custody, not executing them." But the men didn't lower their weapons. They shifted their aim. Not toward Elena's hiding place, toward Holloway. "I'm sorry, General," the lead contractor said, his voice flat and emotionless behind his visor. "But you're not in command here anymore." The contractor's finger moved to the trigger, and then the world exploded into chaos. A fire alarm went off, shrill and deafening. The sprinkler system activated, drenching the ER in a cascade of cold water. The lights flickered and died, plunging everything into emergency lighting, harsh red that turned the hospital into something out of a nightmare. In the confusion, Elena moved. She kicked the supply closet door open hard enough to slam it into the nearest contractor's helmet. The man staggered. Elena grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it like a bat, connecting with his visor. The polycarbonate cracked. The man dropped. "Contact!" someone shouted. "She's armed! Engaging!" Elena didn't stick around to fight 6 operators. She ran. Not toward the exit, toward bed 4, toward Marcus Webb. She burst into the main ER area, water streaming down her face. The 2 police officers guarding Marcus's bed reached for their service weapons, but Elena was faster. "Don't!" she shouted over the alarm. "I'm not going to hurt him. I'm trying to save him. You need to uncuff him. Now!" "Drop the weapon!" one of the officers yelled, his gun trained on the fire extinguisher in Elena's hands. "No time," Elena said. She aimed the extinguisher at the handcuff chain and smashed it down with all her strength. The chain didn't break, but the railing it was attached to bent. Marcus's hand slipped free. General Holloway appeared in the doorway, water soaking his uniform. Behind him, 2 of the contractors had their rifles raised. "Carter!" Holloway shouted. "Or should I call you Captain Morrison?" Elena spun to face him, dropping the extinguisher. For a moment, their eyes met. Holloway's face was a mask of conflicting emotions: relief, grief, shame, and something else: fear. "General," Elena said quietly, her voice barely audible over the alarm and the water. "Are you here to save us or kill us?" "I'm here to bring you in," Holloway said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Both of you. Safe, I promise." "Then why are they here?" Elena gestured at the contractors. "Black Talon doesn't do extractions, General. They do terminations." Holloway's expression crumbled, just for a second, but it was enough. "Stand down," he ordered the contractors. "Lower your weapons. That's an order." But the men didn't lower their weapons. They shifted their aim back toward Elena. And then Marcus Webb woke up. The roar that came out of his throat wasn't human. It was primal. It was rage and pain and 3 years of suppressed trauma exploding all at once. He ripped the remaining restraints off his bed with a shriek of tearing leather and bent metal. The IV line pulled free from his arm in a spray of blood and water. He saw the guns. He saw Elena. He saw the general. And something in his broken mind clicked into place. Protect the medic. Protect the package. Complete the mission. Marcus grabbed the metal bed frame with both hands and threw it. 300 pounds of steel and plastic flew across the room like a missile, crashing into two of the contractors and sending them sprawling into the water-slicked floor. "Move, Doc!" Marcus roared at Elena, his voice raw and wild, but his eyes suddenly clear and focused. "Get to the EL." Elena didn't hesitate. She grabbed a scalpel from a nearby tray and ran for the elevator. Marcus followed, putting his massive body between her and the guns. Holloway shouted something, but it was lost in the chaos. The elevator doors groaned shut just as the first shots rang out. Bullets sparked off the closing steel, punching through but missing both Elena and Marcus by inches. Inside the metal box, silence fell like a hammer. The alarm was muffled here. The water stopped. It was just the two of them, breathing hard, soaked and bleeding. Marcus leaned heavily against the wall, blood mixing with water as it soaked through the hospital gown where his IV had been ripped out. His breathing was labored, but his eyes were clear. Clearer than they'd been in months. He looked at Elena, really looked at her. "Captain Morrison," he said quietly, "they told me you died. Aleppo, 2021. IED outside the compound." "They lied, Sergeant," Elena said, already moving. She ripped the back of his hospital gown open, checking for injuries. 2 bullet wounds, grazes, bleeding but not critical. Just like they lied about everything else. "What's happening?" Marcus asked. "Why are they trying to kill us?" "Because we know too much," Elena said, wrapping her hand with a torn piece of his gown and pressing it against the worst wound. "About Phoenix Ember, about what really happened in those mountains." "Phoenix Ember," Marcus repeated, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "The mission that killed my team. That's what this is about?" "It's bigger than that." Elena's hand stilled. She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that looked like pity. "Marcus, did you ever wonder why you were selected for that mission? Why you, specifically?" "I was a ranger. Delta was pulling from ranger battalions for—" "Your father," Elena said quietly. "Sergeant David Webb. Firebase Echo, 1971. Marcus's blood went cold. "My father died when I was 9. Car accident. That's what my mother told me." "It wasn't an accident." Elena finished bandaging the wound and sat back against the elevator wall. "Your father was at Firebase Echo. He and a private named Wade Hutchins were the only survivors when someone called in an airstrike to cover up a CIA heroin operation. Your father spent 24 years trying to expose it, and in 1995, they staged his death to silence him." "You're lying." "I wish I was." Elena pulled the silver coin from her pocket and pressed it into his hand. "Phoenix Ember wasn't about ISIS. It was about finding proof that the same people who killed your father were still running operations. You weren't selected for your skills, Marcus. You were selected because you're David Webb's son. They wanted to finish what they started. Marcus stared at the coin. 8 names, 5 of them dead, just like Firebase Echo. His father's story, 23 names, 23 dead, history repeating. "Why are you telling me this?" he whispered. "Because when we get out of this elevator, we're going to war. And I need you to know what you're fighting for. Not just Phoenix Ember, Firebase Echo, your father, all of them. The truth." The elevator lurched as it descended into darkness. "We're not getting out of this, are we?" Marcus said, closing his fist around the coin. Elena looked up at him. She smiled. It was a cold smile, a warrior's smile. "Not without a fight," she said. "But we don't die easy, Sergeant. Your father didn't, mine didn't, and neither will we." The elevator dinged. The doors opened onto the basement morgue. And Elena Morrison, who had been hiding for 3 years, stopped running and started hunting. The basement of St. Mercy Hospital was not designed for human comfort. It was designed for the dead and the forgotten. The elevator doors opened onto a corridor of absolute darkness, the kind of darkness that feels like it has weight and substance. The power had been cut. Whether by design or by sabotage, Elena didn't know and didn't care. All that mattered was that they were blind. The only light came from emergency bulbs mounted every 20 feet along the ceiling, casting pools of crimson that made the concrete walls look like they were bleeding. The air was cold and thick with the smell of formaldehyde, industrial cleaner, and something else, something metallic and old. Death had a smell. Elena knew it well. "How many?" Marcus whispered beside her. His voice was steady now, all traces of the PTSD episode gone. When the shooting started, something in his brain had clicked back into place. He was operational again. Focused. Dangerous. 6 black Talon contractors topside, Elena said quietly, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. Probably more outside. Standard kill team is 8 to 12 operators for a target like us. Like us, Marcus repeated. "Captain, I don't even know what that means anymore. What the hell is Phoenix Ember? Why are they trying to kill us?" "Later," Elena said. "Right now we need to move. They'll breach this level in less than 2 minutes. We need weapons, cover, and a way out." She looked down the corridor. To the left was the morgue, steel drawers lining the walls like filing cabinets for the dead. To the right was the maintenance section, boilers and pipes and the guts of the hospital's infrastructure. Straight ahead was the loading dock, the only exit that didn't lead back through the ER. "Loading dock," Marcus said, reading her mind. "It's our only play. It's what they want us to do," Elena countered. "Standard kill box. Funnel the targets into a confined space with limited exits and take them down with overwhelming firepower." "So what's the alternative? Hide down here until we starve?" Elena's mind raced. She wasn't thinking like a nurse anymore. She was thinking like an operator. Like someone who had spent 5 years running missions in places where one mistake meant death. "We set up our own kill box," she said slowly. "We know this terrain better than they do. They're coming in blind, relying on thermals and night vision. We use that against them." "How?" Elena pointed at the maze of pipes running along the ceiling. Steam pipes, water mains, electrical conduits, a whole infrastructure that kept the hospital running. "Steam," she said. "High-pressure steam blinds thermal imaging. And if we can trip the emergency sprinklers, we flood their optics completely." Marcus smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "You want to turn the basement into a fog bank?" "Exactly. Then we move through it. Take them down one by one. We don't need to kill all of them. We just need to create enough chaos to break their formation and get to the loading dock." "That's a terrible plan, Captain." "You have a better one?" "No, ma'am. Let's go to work." They moved quickly through the darkness, Elena leading with Marcus following close behind. His hospital gown was soaked with blood and water from the torn IV site, but he ignored it. Pain was just information. Right now, the only information that mattered was survival. They reached the maintenance section. The door was unlocked, which was both a blessing and a concern. Elena pushed it open slowly, checking corners, scanning for threats. The room beyond was a cathedral of machinery. Massive boilers hummed and clicked. Pipes as thick as tree trunks ran floor to ceiling. The heat was oppressive. "There," Marcus said, pointing to a steam pipe that ran along the ceiling before disappearing into the wall. "Main steam line for the laundry and heating systems. We crack that open, this whole section fills with pressurized steam in under 30 seconds. Can you reach it?" Marcus looked up. The pipe was 12 feet off the ground, secured with metal brackets every few feet. "Yeah, but I'll need something to hit it with. Wrench, pipe, something heavy." Elena scanned the room and found what she needed leaning against the far wall. A 4-foot length of steel pipe, probably left over from some repair job. She grabbed it and handed it to Marcus. "One shot," she said. "As soon as you crack that pipe, we move. The contractors will know exactly where we are." "Understood." Footsteps echoed from the stairwell at the far end of the corridor. Heavy boots on concrete, moving fast but controlled. Professional. "They're here," Elena whispered. Marcus reached up, grabbed the exposed section of the steam pipe with one massive hand, and swung the steel bar with the other. The impact was like a gunshot. Metal shrieked, the pipe cracked, and then, with a sound like a freight train, superheated steam exploded into the room. The effect was instantaneous. White vapor filled the space with the fury of a flash flood, scalding and dense. Within seconds, visibility dropped to zero. The temperature spiked to over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The moisture in the air condensed on every surface. "Move!" Elena shouted over the roar. They ran back into the corridor just as the steam cloud began to spill out, racing along the ceiling like a living thing. Elena heard shouting from the stairwell, confused voices, orders being barked. "Thermal's white. I can't see anything. Switch to night vision. It's too thick. I'm blind. Advance by sectors. Watch your spacing." Elena and Marcus dropped low, moving beneath the rising steam cloud. The floor was cold concrete, wet now from condensation. They crawled on elbows and knees, making no sound, becoming part of the darkness. The first contractor appeared through the steam like a ghost. He was sweeping his rifle back and forth, the laser sight cutting red lines through the white vapor. He was looking up, scanning at head height, expecting targets to be standing. He never looked down. Elena rose up behind him like a specter. She had no gun, no knife, but she had the scalpel she'd grabbed from the ER, and she knew exactly where to put it. The blade went into the back of his knee, severing the popliteal artery with surgical precision. He dropped instantly, his voice rising in a scream that was cut short when Marcus's massive hand clamped over his mouth. The contractor went limp. Elena stripped him of his rifle. HK 416, familiar weight. She trained on these weapons at Fort Bragg. 5.5-second ammunition, 30-round magazine, effective range 600 meters. She checked the chamber, saw the brass glint of a loaded round, and moved forward. Two more contractors were advancing through the steam, moving shoulder to shoulder, trying to maintain formation. They were good, well-trained, but they were operating in an environment they didn't understand, following protocols designed for open combat, not this claustrophobic nightmare. Elena tapped Marcus on the shoulder and pointed. He nodded. She raised the rifle, sighted through the haze, and fired 3 controlled bursts. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Both contractors dropped, their body armor taking the hits, but the kinetic force knocking them down. Marcus surged forward before they could recover, his fists like sledgehammers. The first contractor took a blow to the temple that snapped his head sideways with an audible crack. The second tried to bring his weapon up, but Marcus grabbed the barrel and bent it. Actually bent the steel barrel like it was made of clay. Then he drove his forehead into the man's visor, shattering it in the face beneath. "Clear," Marcus said, breathing hard. They moved on. The steam was spreading now, filling the entire basement level. The emergency lights turned everything into a red-white kaleidoscope of shadow and vapor. Elena's heart was hammering, but her hands were steady. This was what she'd been trained for. This was who she really was beneath the nurse's scrubs and the timid voice. This was Captain Elena Morrison. Delta Force. 47 confirmed kills. 94% mission success rate. The Ghost. They reached the heavy double doors leading to the loading dock. Elena paused, listening. On the other side of those doors, she could hear voices. More contractors. How many? 3? 4? It didn't matter. They had to go through. Marcus positioned himself on one side of the door. Elena took the other. They locked eyes. No words needed. They'd done this dance before, in a different place, a different time. Elena held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. Marcus kicked the door open with enough force to rip it off its hinges. Fresh night air hit them like a slap. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still choked with clouds, blocking out the moon and stars. The loading dock was a concrete platform 30 feet long, with a ramp leading up to the parking lot. Sodium lights cast harsh orange pools across the wet asphalt, and standing between them and freedom was an armored SUV. Black. No plates. Windows tinted so dark they looked like solid obsidian. In front of the SUV stood 4 men. The first was General Marcus Holloway. His pristine uniform was rumpled now, and there was blood on his collar. Not his blood, someone else's. His face was a mask of resignation and grief. The second and third were contractors, rifles raised, fingers on triggers. But it was the fourth man who made Elena's blood turn to ice. He stood apart from the others, hands clasped behind his back, looking for all the world like he was attending a garden party rather than an execution. He wore a black tactical suit that fit him perfectly, custom-tailored. His hair was silver, cut military short. His face was lined with age, but still handsome in a cruel, aristocratic way. On his collar, barely visible in the sodium light, was a small pin. The insignia of a colonel, an eagle. Colonel Wade Hutchins, 65 years old. But Elena had last seen him in Afghanistan, 5 years ago, when he'd been her instructor, her mentor, her hero. Captain Morrison, Wade said, his voice carrying easily across the loading dock despite the distance. It's been a long time. Elena's rifle stayed up, aimed at center mass. Her finger rested alongside the trigger guard. Not on the trigger, not yet, but close. Colonel Hutchins, she said flatly, I thought you retired. I did, and then they made me a better offer. Wade smiled. It was a cold thing, devoid of warmth. Black Talon pays extremely well for someone with my particular skill set. You're a mercenary, Marcus spat. You sold out. Wade's eyes flicked to Marcus, and something like pity crossed his face. Sergeant Webb, I'm sorry about what happened to you. The PTSD, the flashbacks. That wasn't supposed to happen. You were supposed to die with the rest of your team in Afghanistan. The fact that you survived was an unfortunate complication. Phoenix Ember, Elena said. It was a setup from the beginning, wasn't it? The whole operation. You sent us into those mountains knowing we'd be ambushed. Not quite, Wade said. The mission was real. The intelligence was real. There really was an ISIS commander hiding in that compound. But what you found there, the documents, the evidence of ongoing black operations, funding extremist networks through shell companies, that was the complication. He took a step forward, his hands still clasped behind his back. Non-threatening, conversational, like they were discussing strategy over coffee. 5 of your team members died when that airstrike came in. You and Sergeant Webb survived because you were providing overwatch from the ridge. You weren't supposed to see the strike. You weren't supposed to know it was deliberate. Elena felt her fingers slide onto the trigger. The pressure was light. 2 more pounds and the rifle would fire. So you've spent 3 years hunting us, she said. 3 years trying to clean up your mess. Not my mess, Captain. I'm just the cleanup crew. But you're right that it's taken 3 years. You're very good at hiding. I taught you too well. Why now? Elena asked. Why come after us tonight? Wade gestured at Marcus. Because Sergeant Webb broke out of the VA hospital 3 weeks ago. Because he's been leaving a trail across half the country, asking questions, digging into Phoenix Ember. And because you, Captain Morrison, made the mistake of exposing yourself to save him. He paused, his expression becoming almost regretful. You could have stayed hidden. You could have let him destroy that ER and disappear. But you didn't. You couldn't. Because underneath all that trauma and guilt, you're still a soldier. You still can't abandon your people. That's not a weakness, Elena said. No, Wade agreed. It's not. It's what made you one of the best operators I ever trained. But it's also what's going to get you killed tonight. He raised his hand, and the contractor's fingers tightened on their triggers. Wait! General Holloway stepped forward, positioning himself between the contractors and Elena. Colonel, this has gone far enough. Captain Morrison and Sergeant Webb deserve a trial. Due process. You can't just execute them in a hospital parking lot. Wade sighed. General, step aside. You've done your part. You brought them here. Your involvement ends now. No, Holloway said, his voice firm. I brought them here because you told me they'd be taken into protective custody. You told me they'd be debriefed and reassigned. You didn't say anything about a hit team. I lied, Wade said simply. Step aside, Marcus. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I won't let you kill them, Holloway said. These are my soldiers. I'm responsible for them. Wade pulled a pistol from his holster. A Sig Sauer P226, 9mm, 15-round magazine. He shot General Marcus Holloway twice in the chest. The general's eyes went wide with shock. He looked down at the spreading red stains on his uniform, then back up at Wade. His lips moved, trying to form words, but only blood came out. He fell. No! Elena screamed. Wade's gun swung toward her. Marcus Webb let out a sound that wasn't human. It was rage and grief and 3 years of suppressed trauma exploding out of him all at once. He didn't have a gun. The HK-416 he'd taken from the dead contractor was empty, the magazine expended during the firefight in the basement. But Marcus Webb didn't need a gun. He had 300 pounds of muscle and bone and fury, and he had his father's legacy to avenge. He charged. The contractors fired. Their rounds hit his torso, impacting the stolen tactical vest he'd stripped from one of the dead operators. The vest held for the first 3 shots, then failed. The 4th and 5th bullets punched through, burying themselves in Marcus's abdomen and chest. He didn't stop. He hit the first contractor like a freight train. The impact sounded like a car crash. Bones shattered. The contractor flew backward, crashing into the SUV with enough force to leave a dent in the door panel. The second contractor tried to backpedal, bringing his rifle up, but Marcus grabbed the barrel and used it as a lever. He swung the man in a complete arc, slamming him into the concrete loading dock. The contractor's helmet cracked. His body went limp. Wade raised his pistol, aiming at Marcus's head for a killing shot. Elena fired first. Her round caught Wade in the shoulder, spinning him around. The pistol flew from his hand, skittering across the wet asphalt. Wade stumbled but didn't fall. He grabbed for a backup weapon, a knife strapped to his thigh. But Marcus was on him. The giant's hand closed around Wade's throat, lifting him completely off the ground. Marcus's face was a mask of blood and rage, his eyes wild but focused. You killed my friends, Marcus said, each word punctuated by squeezing tighter. You killed Mary. You killed my father. You broke me. You broke all of us. Wade clawed at Marcus's hand, his face turning purple. His legs kicked uselessly in the air. Marcus, stop, Elena shouted, running forward. We need him alive. He's the only proof we have. But Marcus wasn't listening. He was back in Afghanistan, standing over Mary's body, helpless and screaming. He was 9 years old again, being told his father had died in a car accident, not knowing it was murder. He was back in the VA hospital, strapped to a bed, pumped full of drugs that made him forget his own name. He was back in every nightmare he'd had for 3 years, and he wanted it to end. Wade's struggles weakened. His eyes began to roll back. Elena reached Marcus and grabbed his arm. "Sergeant, stand down, that's an order." The words cut through the red haze. Marcus blinked. His grip loosened slightly. Wade gasped, sucking in air. "We need him," Elena said more gently. "He knows who gave the orders, who signed off on Phoenix Ember, who authorized the airstrike on Firebase Echo. Without him, we're just two crazy veterans with a conspiracy theory. Your father's name stays buried. The 23 men at Firebase Echo stay forgotten. We need him alive, Marcus, for them." Marcus's hand trembled. He looked at Elena, then at Wade, then at General Holloway's body lying in a pool of blood on the concrete. His hand opened. Wade fell to the ground, gasping and choking. But Marcus didn't celebrate. His legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, blood pouring from multiple wounds. The adrenaline that had been keeping him going evaporated, leaving behind only pain and exhaustion. "Marcus!" Elena dropped beside him, her hands moving automatically, checking wounds, applying pressure. Her training as a combat medic kicked in. "Stay with me, you're going to be okay. You did good. You did so good." "Did I save them?" Marcus whispered, his eyes unfocused. Blood bubbled at his lips. Did I get everyone out? My father, did I make him proud?" Elena's throat tightened. She thought about the 8 operators who had gone into the Afghan mountains 5 years ago. She thought about the 5 who never came home. She thought about David Webb and the 23 soldiers at Firebase Echo. "Yeah," she said softly, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "You got everyone out. Your father would be proud, Marcus. So proud. Mission complete, Ranger." Marcus smiled. Blood stained his teeth. "Good," he breathed. "That's good. I can rest now." His eyes closed. Sirens wailed in the distance. Blue and red lights painted the clouds, growing brighter as they got closer. Captain Kane and half the Chicago Police Department were coming, drawn by the gunfire. Elena looked up to see Kane himself running down the ramp, his service weapon drawn. Behind him came a dozen uniformed officers. Kane took in the scene with one sweeping glance. The dead contractors, the wounded colonel, the fallen general. Marcus Webb unconscious and bleeding out, and Elena, kneeling in the middle of it all, covered in blood. "Officer down!" Elena shouted, her voice cracking. "General Holloway is down. We need paramedics, now!" Kane ran to Holloway first, checking for a pulse. His face went grim. "He's gone," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." Then he looked at Elena. "You," he said, "you're at the center of all this, aren't you? This isn't just about a PTSD episode. This is something bigger." Elena didn't answer. She kept pressure on Marcus's wounds, counting compressions, monitoring his breathing. Kane looked at the contractors. He recognized military hardware when he saw it. He recognized a kill team. And he recognized a cover-up in progress. He made a decision. The general was killed trying to protect 2 veterans from illegal rendition by private contractors, Kane said loudly, for the benefit of the other officers who were arriving. "Self-defense. Clear case of self-defense." He crouched beside Elena, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "You saved a lot of lives tonight. Whatever you're running from, whatever you're hiding, I don't care. But you can't stay here. The feds will be here in 10 minutes, and whoever sent these contractors will send more." "Marcus needs surgery," Elena said. "He needs Walter Reed. He needs people who can help him." "I'll make sure he gets there," Kane promised. "I'll tell them he's a hero. I'll tell them he saved the hospital and stopped an illegal black ops team, because that's the truth. But you?" He looked at the open gate at the far end of the parking lot, leading to an alley that disappeared into the Chicago night. I never saw you. I just saw some contractors trying to grab two wounded veterans. The general tried to stop them. He died a hero. You were never here. Elena looked down at Marcus. The EMTs were arriving now, running with a stretcher and medical gear. They'd take care of him. He'd survive. The wounds were bad, but not fatal if he got help fast enough. And Wade Hutchins was being handcuffed by two officers, still coughing and gasping. He was alive. He'd talk. Eventually, under interrogation, under threat of treason charges, the truth would come out. "Thank you," Elena whispered to Kane. She stood up. She looked one last time at Marcus Webb, at General Holloway's covered body, at Wade Hutchins being dragged to his feet. Then she ran. She sprinted through the gate, into the alley, into the darkness of Chicago. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Looking back would mean acknowledging what she was leaving behind. Her footsteps echoed off brick walls. Rain began to fall again, washing the blood from her hands and face. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs threatened to give out, until the sirens faded behind her. Finally, she stopped in a narrow alley between two apartment buildings. She leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from exhaustion, from adrenaline crash, from 3 years of running catching up to her all at once. She pulled out the silver coin from her pocket, the Phoenix Ember coin. She stared at the 8 names etched around the edge. 5 of them were dead. 1 of them was in a hospital. 1 of them was in custody, and 1 of them was still running. Elena pocketed the coin and walked deeper into the night. 6 months passed like water through fingers. The story of the hospital siege made national news for exactly 3 days before it was buried under other tragedies and scandals. The official report said that a veteran suffering from PTSD had an episode at St. Mercy Hospital. A team of private military contractors attempted to illegally rendition him and another veteran. Lieutenant General Marcus Holloway intervened and was killed. The contractors were arrested. Colonel Wade Hutchins, leader of the operation, was charged with murder, conspiracy, and violations of the UCMJ. The veteran, Sergeant Marcus Webb, was hospitalized and later transferred to Walter Reed for long-term care. No mention was made of a nurse named Elena Carter. But truth has a way of surviving. Walter Reed Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland was a cathedral of healing. Its gardens were immaculate, filled with paths where wounded soldiers could walk and remember what it felt like to be whole. On a bright morning in May, when the cherry blossoms were in full bloom, a man in a wheelchair sat on one of those paths. Sergeant Marcus Webb looked better than he had in years. His beard was trimmed, his hair was cut. The haunted look in his eyes had faded, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. His left leg was in a brace, the result of multiple surgeries to repair damage from bullets and years of combat injuries. But he was alive. A nurse approached with the morning mail. She smiled at him, that professional warmth that all good nurses develop, and handed him a small stack of letters and magazines. "Anything good today?" she asked. Marcus flipped through the stack. Bills, a letter from his sister, a magazine subscription, and an envelope with no return address. The envelope was thick, heavy. Marcus opened it carefully. Inside was a coin, silver, worn smooth, the Delta Force insignia on one side. On the other, 8 names around the words Phoenix Ember. And beneath the coin was a note, handwritten on hospital stationery. "Marcus, heard you're walking again. Don't rush it. The world still needs giants." Wade Hutchins faced military tribunal last month. He took a deal, life in Leavenworth in exchange for full disclosure. Turned out he'd been keeping records for 50 years. Names, dates, operations. Firebase Echo was just the beginning. There were 17 other incidents, 17 other cover-ups. General Holloway didn't make it. But his last words were recorded by Captain Kane. Full confession. He knew about Phoenix Ember. He knew it was a setup. But Black Talon was blackmailing him with evidence of his involvement in Firebase Echo. He was the young lieutenant who relayed the airstrike coordinates back in '71. He'd been carrying that guilt for 50 years. He thought he was protecting you and me by bringing us in. He was wrong. But he died trying to do the right thing. The 5 from Phoenix Ember are finally getting the recognition they deserved. Their names are being added to the wall. Their families are being told the truth. Your father's name is being cleared. The car accident in '95 is being reinvestigated as homicide. He's being recognized posthumously for his attempts to expose Firebase Echo. He was a hero, Marcus, and so are you. It's not justice, not complete. Some of the people at the top will never be charged. Some of the secrets will stay buried. But it's something. You did good, Ranger. You saved more than just me. You saved the truth. Rest now. You've earned it. Ghost. Marcus read the note 3 times. Then he clutched the coin tight in his fist and looked up at the sky. Clouds moved overhead, white and fluffy, innocent and pure. Copy that, Captain, he whispered. Mission complete. And Dad, I hope I made you proud. He tucked the coin into his shirt pocket, right over his heart, and wheeled himself back toward the rehab center. He had physical therapy in an hour, and for the first time in 3 years, he was looking forward to it. In a small diner in Montana, 600 miles away, a waitress with red hair and glasses refilled coffee cups and smiled at customers. She wore a name tag that said Rachel. She had been working there for 4 months. The regulars liked her. She was quiet but efficient, always had a kind word for the truckers who stopped in on their way across the country. No one knew that beneath her apron, she wore a silver coin on a chain around her neck. No one knew that she still woke up some nights with her hands around an invisible throat, executing techniques she'd learned in a place most people didn't know existed. No one knew that she was Captain Elena Morrison, the Ghost, one of the deadliest operators Delta Force had ever produced. And no one needed to know, because some ghosts were meant to stay buried, some secrets were meant to stay hidden, but some truths Elena had learned refused to die. They waited in the darkness, patient and relentless, until someone was brave enough to drag them into the light. She poured coffee for an old man sitting at the counter. He was 70, maybe 75, wearing a veteran's cap and a jacket covered in patches and pins. Thank you, dear, he said, his voice rough from decades of cigarettes and whiskey. Elena smiled. Thank you for your service. The old man looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his eyes sharpened. Recognition, not of her face, but of something deeper, something only soldiers recognized in each other. You serve? He asked quietly. Elena's smile didn't waver, but her hand went to the coin beneath her shirt. She touched it through the fabric. Long time ago, she said. Different war. The old man nodded slowly. He understood. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. Welcome home, he said simply. Elena felt something break inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for 3 years. She felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them away. Thank you, she whispered. She moved on to the next table, refilling coffee, taking orders, being Rachel, the waitress. But underneath the red hair and the glasses and the fake smile, she was still Elena Morrison, still the ghost, still alive, still fighting. And somewhere in a classified file in a basement at the Pentagon, a folder marked Operation Phoenix Ember was being reopened. Questions were being asked. Investigations were being launched. 5 soldiers who had died in the mountains of Afghanistan were finally getting the truth told about their sacrifice. 23 soldiers from Firebase Echo were finally being recognized for what really happened. And 2 veterans who had survived against all odds were finally getting the recognition they deserved. It wasn't justice, not completely. Some of the people responsible would never face trial. Some of the secrets would stay buried forever. But it was something. It was enough. Elena Morrison refilled another coffee cup, smiled at another customer, and continued living the life she'd built from ashes and lies. She was free. She was hidden. She was home. And if anyone ever came looking for the ghost again, they'd find out what every enemy who'd ever faced Captain Elena Morrison had learned the hard way. The mouse was a lie. The lion was real. And lions don't die easy. The end.